Hi everyone, Pat Corcoran here, Hitachi Digital Services. I'm here with my colleagues and one of our partners, ISG, where we are discussing Gen AI. We've chosen today to do that because over the last 6 months, there's been a lot of news in the market. There's been a lot of noise with the clients, and there's been a lot of good stuff, tough stuff, and what we're trying to get at here is the real stuff. I'd like to start by asking Rajesh, you've been involved with a lot of client dialogue. You've been involved in a lot of project deployment. How has Gen AI become a topic amongst all those conversations you're having?
Yeah, Gen AI, I think, first of all, starting with the buzz around it, right? Everyone wants to know what it means to them and how they can start leveraging the technology itself, right? So as part of projects, there are conversations around how do we drive efficiencies using the technology? How can you do transformation of both their internal processes as well as what are the offerings that they could offer to the customers with generative AI. So these are the topics that are being discussed. These are all still in initial stages, I would say, right? And I think there is certainly expectations from partner to help guide their thinking as well as shape their approach to implementing generative AI.
So a key thing you mentioned was this is sort of the beginnings of it, right? And Prashant, part of your role at ISG is to actually not only do consulting, but shape the market, right? Have to have the enterprises start to think about what's the right way to go about this, along with what should vendors be offering. So how are you seeing that work out over the last 6 to 9 months?
I mean, just like Rajesh said, the conversations are definitely there, but you also rely on us to separate where clients are talking and where clients are spending. And if you look at talk versus spend, I would say the spend areas are mostly in areas which are low risk.
Okay.
So, of course, if you look at Gen AI, you might think you could change the way you do your customer engagement, but we're seeing very few do that because nobody can predict how this can work and what impact this would have on the brand. So they start in low risk areas. We call those the knowledge management areas. So everywhere where there are knowledge workers involved, it's easy because this is where we have the most data stores, and this is where you're looking at augmenting internal employees before you take something outside. So talk versus spend, I would say the talk is everywhere, just like Rajesh just said. I would say the spend is coming in the internal areas first.
So Prem, as your role at Hitachi Digital Services around really leading the what we'll call cutting edge technology and really being a practitioner of Gen AI, what's been your experience within the context of this client discussions that these guys have been a part of?
Interestingly, Patrick, everybody wants to learn Gen AI and everybody wants to be a part of the conversation. So this is all about even our customers getting savvy around the technology itself. So that's been the first tranche, right? Now the second is POC versus productionization of a Gen AI use case. Now, and these are very different in my perspective, right? POC is pretty straightforward. A lot of the hyperscalers, OpenAI type LLM providers are trying to give features so you can create and knock up your own stuff that you want to go look at. But when you really think about productionization, there is a lot more around understanding the responsibility of the AI itself. How does it interact with your employees? What kind of data does it have visibility into? And is the data good? So things around toxicity analysis, sentiment analysis, the integrity of the AI itself, the validity and veracity of the results, how accurate you need it to be versus how accurate it is. All of this comes into play when you think about productionizing a Gen AI workload, and that's what we're slowly starting customers moving towards, and that's a lot of scope for customers to understand and implement at this point in time. So I'll say technology wise, everybody has now moved towards, hey, I know how to do a proof of concept using any of these Gen AI stuff, but when I get to production, what are the 10 things that I should look for beyond just using an LLM?
So Prashant, are you seeing the need to help with some of the education on this in terms of, because what Prem talked about is very technical, and if you're not really in this industry, it's hard to follow. and you're used to a lot of IT service conversations. What does that integration look like now? Are people starting to get it and how to leverage it, or is it still sort of internally, let me think about it before I do it?
I think just building on what Prem said, we see the exact same thing. A lot of our clients are running POCs. They're doing this with multiple hyperscalers, multiple SIs, seeing the exact same things. The conversations which come back to us are how do we set guardrails for all of the experiments? Nobody's trying to stop these experiments, but everybody's trying to say, what happens if one of these works and then you got to scale it? How do you put guardrails around hundreds of experiments? I'll just take 2 examples. What happens when, for example, a client buys a foundational model from Hitachi? Let's say they do. Let's say they buy a model from Prem. Now, let's say that this model, and I know it won't, but let's say this model has been trained with copyrighted data. Now, who would be liable when this is found out? Would it be Hitachi? Would it be a client? And these are the kind of situations we're trying to figure out. What the guardrails should be. What are the liabilities? What happens when Hitachi's model has been then trained with the proprietary data of the client? So then the algorithm has changed. Who owns the new intellectual property? Is it Hitachi? Is it your client? Will you be paying each other a royalty? I think it's a rabbit hole we're going down. Those are the conversations we get involved in. How do you put guardrails around it? I think the second thing is, let's say, Prem was just saying this, some of these POCs might actually scale. But scale on what? What's the landing zone? What's the storage compute network? Where's the enterprise edge? It's not going to be all data centers, and I seriously don't think it's going to be all hyperscalers either. I mean, all of this is going right up to the enterprise edge and not just the network edge. So what is that landing zone? How can you create that architecture runway just maybe 6 months ahead of the experiments? Those are the 2 conversations we are involved in.
So I hear you both referring to partners quite a bit in this. So I'm interested, Rajesh, what's your take on the role of the ecosystem in developing sort of Gen AI for the enterprise? And in terms of guardrails, is this something that the partner has to be vigilant of as well when they're dealing with certain types of data?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the ecosystem is going to be so critical to this any enterprise's journey of using generative AI for driving outcomes, both internal as well as external, right? And I think the responsibility is going to be with all parties in terms of the partners, the platforms that they're bringing in, the partners who are implementing it for their enterprises, as well as whoever is using it. And now I think Prashant discussed about the governance part of it. The governance aspects are going to spread from both internal governance aspects, and it is going to expand to the regulatory aspects that are going to start coming in, right, in terms of how these AI models are going to be governed. Now, when we look at regulatory compliance, the platforms, the ecosystem contributors in terms of bringing in these technologies are going to be significantly cautious about what is being developed. They have to, right? And then on the customer side, they need to be, when they absorb these technologies, be cognizant of what these platforms are, how are they compliant with the general needs that a regulatory compliance controls are going to be, as well as their own internal controls, right? So I think the ecosystem of platform providers, service providers, and customers, this is going to be a harmony between all of these elements to be able to drive a journey for an enterprise.
So it sounds like service delivery, you need to have your A-team on this at all the times, right? So Prem, I mean, what's been your role here in terms of finding the right team of skills and finding the right people offshore, on-site, consulting, architect, otherwise, to really manage these types of engagements?
Yeah, when we think about the skills needed, I don't believe you need to go out to the market and hire a ton of people again, right? The skills can largely be trained internally. It's more about upskilling and cross-skilling. But the fact is, there is more skilling that needs to be done. I mean, every developer, every engineer should understand the landscape, leveraging either copilots for code generation or leveraging open source for managing responsible AI or leveraging partner products to bring in value for our end customers. But that cross-skilling, upskilling has to happen. Now there is this whole new chatter about prompt engineering and how do you learn. Yes, that is there, but there are a lot of details available. So we've in fact internally within Hitachi as well put together a curriculum that helps our developers and engineers understand the prompting techniques, work with LLMs from a prompt standpoint for code generation, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, delivering to Gen AI workloads will be very similar to how we've been delivering in the past. But the key is every developer needs to be upskilled, and it's not just delivering to it. I truly believe anybody who's not upskilled in this will be left behind, because this is not about a net new market of creating engineers. It's about all of us knowing this technology and it becoming table stakes in a few years.
If I may add to what Prem said, I think Prem covered all the technology aspects of it, right? One critical component for being successful as a service provider to an enterprise is about bringing in the domain capabilities. Because at the end of the day, irrespective of the technology being used, it is all about generating the business outcomes. To be able to generate the business outcomes, it is about knowing the domain and what data is going to be used to be able to leverage this technology, because that's going to be critical. So I think the domain capability part is going to be pretty critical in terms of success using this technology.
And I know, Prashant, I think this leads right into a lot of the work you've been talking about publicly about Gen AI, is the industry angle. So what's your overall thesis there?
Maybe I'll just build on what Prem and Rajesh have been saying. The current state is, if you have 100 people who know IT and technology, around 9 can deal with data. Of those 9 who can deal with data, 3 can deal with AI. And of those, 0.6 can actually program this AI. So this is where the current state of the industry is in terms of skill base. Now, I'm equally an optimist like Prem. I think this is a question of upskilling. The problem is not going to be in finding more AI skills. The problem is going to be something else. It's going to be in domain translation. And I think that's what Rajesh was talking about. Domain translation of what now AI makes possible. And does AI make you more revenue? Does AI give you a new product? Does AI give you extra customers? Or does AI optimize your operations? Or does AI solve any regulatory or compliance issue? So it's going to be one of these 5. But you need domain expertise for that. What no one's talking about is all of this is not possible unless you have data stores. So there's no AI without IA, information architecture, and there's no IA without data. So now I think some seriousness will come back into the industry on where you actually have data to achieve any ambition you might have laid out.
So this kind of falls into our background as Hitachi, the whole data piece, right? Do you want to comment around that a little bit more, Prem?
Absolutely. So 2 comments on what Prashant said. So one, definitely the domain part, right? Because I recently even touched upon an article where, again, I did piece an article where one of the key things that I spoke about, Prashant, was it's not going to be a cookie cutter solution that you create in Gen AI and then supply it to all our customers. It's going to be very specific for a customer. While the technology is equitable and can be accessed, leveraged across multiple customers, what does it solve, to your point, will be a specific domain, subdomain, or a use case that's very relevant to a customer. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the data part of this. And he said it, Prashant said it very well. It's IA that drives AI. So you need a solid data footprint. And for us, that we again, I as well look at it as an advantage for Hitachi, because we're very ingrained in the data space. Our heritage is data, and as even a larger Hitachi Limited, we're sitting on loads of data that our companies collectively produce. And in fact, our R&D teams are working on what does it mean? How can we contribute back to the industry leveraging data? Can we help industry-based LLMs that can be built. So there are a lot of research going on around that as Hitachi. So I think data and AI is going to be a very critical space, and we believe it will be to Hitachi's advantage, and we will be able to add a lot of value to our customers the way we're thinking about Gen AI and data.
What are some of the challenges that you guys are seeing with this entire ecosystem of Gen AI? I mean, it all sounds great, it all drives business, we all know that at the end, but things are going to be difficult. Brajesh, do you want to start with some of the challenges you may be seeing?
Yeah, I think I'll start with a couple. The most macro level is there's a lot of interest and wanting to use this technology, but where is and for what are the two basic questions to ask, right?
So
in terms of
raising their hand, I want to use it, but I don't know where or how.
Yeah, what is the use case that is going to drive a tangible business outcome is the very first one, right? And then immediately following that is the whole data part of it. Okay, do I have the support? Do I have enough of the data? Do I have the data relevant? Do I have trusted data that can help me drive these business outcomes by implementing this technology, right? And that's going to be the second one. Then the third one is about how do I govern this? If I implement this, who are the people who are going to be using it? What does that mean for my organization itself, right? Are there any proprietary information going to be going out, and hence what is the technology architecture that I should be using? So then comes the part about, okay, for being able to drive the outcomes, who are the people who I need to train to be able to use it? There are consumers of this technology, right? Then there are people who are going to be supporting this technology on an ongoing basis. Then there is continuous training happening. What happens to all the incremental data that is being produced? And because training is not a one-time thing, it's going to happen on an ongoing basis, right? So we could go on and on, but I think the macro level challenges are these, right? Once we address this, then there are going to be things that are going to come along because the technology is still evolving.
Yeah.
Right? No one has a super set of challenges yet. Right? And I believe the industry as such, the consumers, the service providers, the platform providers, everyone are going to be learning along the way.
And I think there are two more things to probably consider as well, Patrick, very, very relevant. One is the security, right? So that's going to become a critical aspect because like Prashant mentioned, there is a landing zone. Where do we go with this? It's all going to be hybrid, right? I can have my documents within my own space, but then I go and talk to an LLM like OpenAI or Azure or AWS for inferences. So how does all of this interact and how does that sandbox look like, right? That is going to be very critical. And I think one that has still not been worked out, and I think 2024 and 2025 might start defining it, is the ROI for all of this, right? And we call it FinOps for Gen AI just because FinOps is a term that the industry understands very well. When you do iterative development, how do you manage cost? But in this case, there is very little data for anybody to say that, hey, I can take an open source LLM, put it in my own hardware, in my data center, and it will be 10 times cheaper than going to an Amazon and using a Q or a Whisperer or whatever, right, a Titan model. That is still not, and that is one of the reasons why there is no mass spending on the customer side around this. But if you think about a lot of service providers, they're betting big, right, like the Accentures of the world, our competitors, they're saying, hey, we're going to spend 10 billion, 1 billion, 3 billion. There are numbers floating all over the place on particular in this technology because everybody knows that's something that we have to embrace. But from a customer standpoint, everybody has money to spend on this, but they want to make sure they're getting the actual ROI and where to put that money into. Like customer service, yes, it might enhance the end user experience, but what does it mean in dollar figures? Code generation, it could speed up code generation 20%, 15%, that's arguable. But what does it mean? Am I reducing so many developers? Am I reducing dependency on my suppliers? None of that has been worked out yet. And I think once they work out this thing that we call as FinOps for Gen AI. I think the scale, the extent with which they start to open their wallet to go after this will increase.
Prashant, do you want to continue along those lines?
Yeah, I find it very curious that Prem uses the word FinOps for Gen AI. I think it's definitely the direction that we should go in. We've learned through the industry on cloud that the promises could be largely held, but nobody expected the invoices to double over the last 2 years. So the world has seen that, and the world is watching cloud with care, especially on the finance angle. So I think if we now jump into Gen AI, and it's fine, we got to do it in a way that experiments finance themselves. And any scaling finances itself based on any experience from the nailing it. So if you go from nailing it to scaling it, the experience of nailing it should create the finance case for scaling it. So I guess if this is how we interpret FinOps for Gen AI, this is the absolute best thing we should do. Walk in with our eyes open and maybe one hand on the purse string. And therefore, I think if you look at governance itself, Prem's raised two points. One is, of course, the cyber parameter is increased. It's no longer just your data center. It's just not your end user computing workspace. It's your enterprise edge and a smart device which could have data in use or data in motion. So your parameters definitely increase. Cyber is a definite angle. So secure AI, self-financing AI or FinOps for AI, and then I guess the point Rajesh was talking about is not just governance but having responsible AI. These I think should be the three elements of any governance of enterprise scale AI.
Yeah, talking about cost, and I think it goes all the way back when we look at a use case identification and corresponding business outcomes. It needs to be looked at even at the design phase of it in terms of how much cost do I anticipate to incur when I implement the solution and run it on an ongoing basis, and are the outcomes kind of directly relevant to that, right? I think those are decisions to be taken along the way in terms of where I implement this technology.
So this is a question really for the panel. We've all been involved in conversations with clients about a particular core enterprise technology, cloud, ERP, testing, whatever it might be, and all of a sudden Gen AI pops in, changes the whole dialogue. We all know that you can't do that one without the other. So how are you sort of harnessing the conversations to say, look, let's finish this discussion before we get here? Is there interdependencies between getting your ERP updated or moving your cloud to public before you talk about Gen AI, or can it be done simultaneously?
The way I would think about it, it's not an either or, right? Because we are driving towards different outcomes, right? And I think the conversations shift beyond just the technology part of it. Okay, if we talk about cloud or data, it's like for what business purpose, right? And if that business purpose is going to be even in or that business outcome is going to be further enhanced by leverage of a generative AI technology, then why not, right? Leverage it. So to me, these are not independent conversations.
I tend to agree with Rajesh. So we could say it's about ERP modernization, but it's never about ERP modernization. It's about resilient supply chain or removing obstacles on the shop floor or having a modular shop floor. So if those are what those programs are, they just tend to be reflected in implementing ERP or implementing cloud. And what happens when AI comes in is, I guess you've just brought in one more aspect. So you look at a program like resilient supply chain and you would have thought, okay, maybe this is a little bit of PLM, it's a little bit of ERP, it's a little bit of shop floor, and you need to see where all of this should sit on the shop floor, and do you need a data center, you need an edge data center, etc. Starting November 2022, you'd think a little differently. You'd say, yes, all of this, and now where is the data sitting? Should the data sit in my PLM system? Should the data sit in my ERP system? Should the data be culled out and put into something like Databricks or Snowflake? Do I need a separate analytics system? Should my systems of record be systems of record? Do I need brand new systems of intelligence? I think data has entered the conversation. So we can say AI, but I think in the implementation, data has now entered the conversation, data has now entered the design, and it starts impacting all the puzzle pieces.
Prem, any comments?
No, I largely agree with what both Prashant and Rajesh said. It's not one or the other, it's both. And it's not about technology, it's about what you want to solve. And I think Prashant made a very good point. When you're moving ERP, it's not about ERP itself, right? It's about why are we doing it? And GenAI has a place in everything in my mind, right? It can impact any of that. Again, if you're doing anything with ERP today, let's say a Salesforce or even a SAP, everybody has their version of GPTs that you should be integrating into your businesses, thinking about how you leverage, and that's GenAI for you, right? While it's packaged and provided to you as a part of the software itself. Now you don't want to think about, hey, I'll go a version before because I started and installed it, and then go over to figure out how I use it. You just try to figure out how you embrace the latest, and that's kind of how I start thinking about those transformations.
And even these technology platforms, they are making it even more attractive because they are starting to invest in AI technologies being embedded as part of the platform offerings itself, and even potentially upselling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if at all decisions have just got harder, I mean, Rajesh started it. You see the hyperscalers investing in this. You'll see the SAPs, the Dassault systems, PTCs invest in this. Snowflake's not going to disappear. If at all, Databricks will get more popular. You have Oracle going to make its own play. So where should your data sit? Should it be with your hyperscaler? Should it sit inside your system of record? Should it sit in a brand new data layer? I think you're going to see a battle amongst the three of these, each of these vying for being the space for data. I think the pure winner in all of these is going to be the system integrator, because there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It has to be purpose-built for the use case.
So one of the things that Hitachi Digital Services has been pushing is really our IT/OT convergence expertise. You know, how are you seeing that in the market in terms of its role within Gen AI?
I think the boundaries will blend. I think today we talk about IT/OT convergence. I don't know whether we'll talk about this in 5 years from the boundaries will blend. I think what will happen is our understanding of the footprint changes. Now the telcos would love us to think about network edge. I think network edge is it's good. It serves its purpose. It just, I guess the discussion is too narrow. We need to move it to the enterprise edge. We need to talk about point of sale systems in retail shops. We need to talk about bank branches. We need to talk about the enterprise edge itself. And then you got to also start looking at where AMD and NVIDIA and the others are putting their bets. And they're not putting their bets only on their data center. They're putting their bets on getting AI-ready clients ready, AI-ready laptops ready. You're going to have AI-ready smart devices. So we need to take a step back and start saying, in everything that we are designing, where will data be in rest? Where will data be in use? And where will data be in motion? And where will data reside? Across these 4 areas, you will know what your AI workloads are, and then therefore your footprint. I think that's the era we are entering now. In that, where is IT and where is OT? I think those boundaries will change.
Do we agree, disagree on blending?
Oh, I agree. I think, see, at the end of the day, if you look at it, it is about the data from these IT or OT systems, all of that coming together to be able to drive better business decisions, business transformations, etc. Right? And I think if we bring these, if you look at data as the common unifier, if you may, right, and that is going to help drive more business transformation than ever, more than ever, right? So this aspect of convergence and all of these starting to blend together from a data layer standpoint is going to further accelerate the business transformation. How certain aspects were done previously is going to change because of this enabler of this data coming together, and there are technologies being able to leverage that data coming together.
So, Prem, it wouldn't be fair to do a roundtable without asking about the role of HARC in Gen AI. What's our approach here?
So there are two angles in which we are approaching Gen AI from a HARC standpoint. So one is Gen AI for HARC, as we call it, which is we collect so much data across the board around observability, around AI ops, around FinOps and application knowledge and stuff. So how do we start applying Gen AI to ease the consumption and analytics out of the data to go get problems faster and go get those root causes faster. So that is one way we're thinking about applying Gen AI in HARC. And this also includes our utilities, code generation, ability to have bots that can talk and provide system health to customers when and where they want, so on and so forth. The second angle is HARC for Gen AI, which is a lot of what I spoke around responsible AI. So this is really, hey, I've applied it, I know it works. Now, how do I set these guardrails? How do I govern? That is one. Second is the performance itself. Now, when I talk about AI performance, it's not like application performance. It is a combination of the speed at which your model can respond, how accurate it could respond, and what kind of data it operates on, and how good the quality of data it is using to respond. So now when you move away from performance being a latency factor, which is how quickly a service responds, to how quickly plus accurately plus valuable the response is. And then the third aspect is FinOps for Gen AI, which is what do I use, where do I use, what kind of hardware does make sense, what model should I use, how much should I train the model, whether I need training for a use case. There is like a zillion permutation and combination around that. So that's kind of what we are solving within HARC, while our OT and our knowledge of OT will start to help us be at the table with the customer on discussing what's the use case. HARC will be at the table for enabling the use case to be institutionalized and industrialized at scale for our customers.
Understood. I often like to ask our panelists to give us one word to describe the Gen AI world, but I know that's going to be difficult. So I'm going to give you each a couple sentences to tell our audience, what's your recommendation? What's your final thought? What do we need to do as providers and leading consultancies and advisories around all this stuff? Rajesh?
Yeah, I would suggest, my thinking would be enterprises should certainly leverage the ecosystem partners to be a core part of their strategy as they go through their AI and generative AI journey.
So like calling an ISG for some advice would be helpful.
Certainly.
Prem?
I mean, developing it beyond what Rajesh said, of course, that's a very valid point. I think everybody should have their own strategy. That doesn't mean they have to go it all alone, but it is very specific, because I've had conversations where there are multiple angles, right? So one is, hey, if I adopt a hyperscaler based Gen AI, then am I getting into a lock-in situation where, because all my data is going to be there, my intelligence is starting to be there, so how can I get out of it? It is further getting me in. Whereas the other end of the spectrum is, I need to create my own, and then that brings you back into the conversation of, do you want to manage so much hardware? Get back into the traditional management life cycle of hardware, data, application, everything running in certain spaces. So I think there is a strategy that is needed, and the answer lies always anywhere in between the spectrum, and customers have to find their sweet spot. And the world today, right, every day something is coming out. I mean, today, a few days back, Gemini and the Gemini related models from Google was released. Today, Microsoft releases a complete RAG pipeline, as they call it, where 6 months, 7 months back, everybody was saying, I know how to do retrieval augmented generation, and I can help you do that. But today, you don't need to know any of that. You just, Azure OpenAI provides, or Azure AI provides it. OpenAI provides it. You can go create your own bots. So all of them are trying to make this more and more accessible for customers. But then what that does is that also creates a level of fragmentation, and you don't know what you should embrace. And this is where I think a strategy is very, very relevant, and the appreciation of the fact that AI is broader than Gen AI, and AI was always there. So a lot of your business problems can be solved by AI, not necessarily Gen AI, is a very core to anybody's strategy that they want to put together, because that is where your data should sit. That is where your algorithm should operate. And then you can democratize using Gen AI. That's kind of my take.
Prashant.
Yeah, just to summarize, I think I'll build on what Rajesh said. It's the world has learned how to buy and build, buy versus build. I think we have to now get used to buy versus build and partner for two things. The first thing is data and insights, not just skill. So we have to go and buy, build, and partner for data and insights. I think we are entering a world also of buy versus build versus partner for joint outcomes. So two sentences, go from skill to data and insights. And I think now is the time to partner for joint outcomes.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the gold rush of AI has fooled some people into thinking we need it right away without having that strategy that Prem reflected upon, and somewhat of a bit of modesty when you're actually thinking about doing this type of technology, embracing this technology, because you got to get it right for all the different reasons we spoke about. Interesting. Well, great dialogue. So I'd like to thank our audience for joining us here in our Park Avenue office at Hitachi here in New York City. And thanks to Prashant Kelker from ISG and my two colleagues, Prem and Rajesh from Hitachi Digital Services. This is Pat Corcoran, and that's the way it is.